What does woke actually mean? Originally, this was a term created by and for Black Americans to refer to being aware of systems of marginalization.
An awareness that systems of marginalization are everywhere and affect everything, and we can't afford to sleep while our rights are being compromised.
But let's be real, the people you hear using the term the most today are probably white right-wingers, especially, conservative pundits. And when they use it, it always has a very negative connotation.
Wokeness, by the way, has an actual definition. The basic idea is Kennedy's idea that America is rife with institutional racism, that institutional racism serves the purposes of white supremacy, and that any disparity is evidence of that racism. That's Kennedy in a nutshell, and it's a scam.
If I was asked to define woke, I would say that it's a cult or a secular religion, which teaches that society is systemically oppressive towards certain supposedly marginalized groups.
Woke is not to just be aware, but to bow down to the new societal hierarchies and issues.
I have to say, though, I regularly hear ideas called woke, even when they aren't based on ideas about systems of marginalization. When I've said gender categories outside of man and woman have existed in countless cultures for as far back as we've been recording history, that historical fact is called woke by itself, even if I don't connect it to oppression of queer people today. If I say fossil fuel use contributes to climate change without further commentary, that can get me called woke too. It's a scientific fact that most libs believe, not some political theory, but it's woke for some on the right. So while the left and the right have their own prescriptive definitions, I think the best descriptive definition at this moment in time is something like a pejorative term for ideas which exist outside of current right-wing thought. Basically, it's liberal stuff. It's liberal stuff that I don't like. It's liberal stuff and bad. Shout out to big/little Joel for his videos on this, which I'm echoing here. But what's up with the right calling the woke a religion or a cult?
And of course, in the woke religion, the Satan figure is the heterosexual white male.
Obviously, it means to say wokeness is a bad thing, but what else? What do they think is religious about it? What does describing wokeness as a religion accomplish? I recently found this graphic, Woke Religion, a Taxonomy, made by atheist author Peter Boghossian and Christian author on environmental politics Michael Schellenberger. It gives more explanation of what woke is a religion means than I've found really anywhere else. So let's go through it. You've got different issues that are relevant to the woke, I suppose. And then there are different supposedly religious features of each of these categories. Original sin, guilty devils, myths, sacred victims, the elect, supernatural beliefs, taboo facts, taboo speech, purifying rituals, purifying speech. I'm more plugged in on climate change and trans issues especially than anything else here, so I'll focus on those. What is the woke climate change religion's idea of original sin? Fossil fuel use. That is an objective, easily observable fact that oil companies themselves have known for several decades now. They were actually some of the very first people to conclude, yeah, the fossil fuels are contributing to climate change. We're doing it. So it's interesting to see that labeled as an original sin ideology when it's not mythological in the way that I think that we will see later, that this taxonomy likes to use the word myth. I mean, this is real. This is just a fact that these guys that made this actually probably would agree with, I would imagine. The original sin in the trans category, sex or gender spectrum reduced to just two sexes and genders. That is something that white Christian culture has done. Again, it's just an observable fact. They even imposed this on other people. That's an observable fact. There's actually quite a bit of history that you can read about people doing that on purpose, especially in order to Christianize and civilize native people that they were conquering, enslaving, and such. But saying that's a bad thing, I suppose, is a bit of a value judgment. You know, some people like freedom of choice and liberal ideas, and some don't. The climate change guilty devils are Exxon, BP, fossil fuel industry. Again, yeah, the fossil fuel industry has actually contributed to climate change. They know they contribute to climate change. They try to cover up the fact that they contribute to climate change. So putting it in the guilty devils category as if this is like a religious, implying almost that it's a supernaturalist idea to think this is, It's got some rhetorical intent behind it, which is pretty obvious. Guilty devils under trans, people who view sex as biologically determined. What? I don't understand that. What? I run in trans advocacy spaces. I do a lot of reading about trans stuff and gender affirming care and things like that. And I just, who is saying that sex is not biologically determined, that sex and biology have nothing to do with each other? I personally don't know anybody who is actually saying that. I've never actually heard someone say that before. I've heard a lot of people say gender is not biologically determined, or maybe not in those words, but something to that effect. Maybe this is coming from the fact that these guys think that gender and sex are exactly the same thing, or they overlap almost entirely. Maybe that's why are they projecting an idea onto kind of trans advocates that sex and gender are the same thing. Therefore, if they hear someone say gender is not biologically determined, then of course that means sex is not biologically determined. This is really confusing and just a straw man as far as I can tell. TERFs, that's trans exclusionary radical feminists. I can see how maybe trans people especially would think that there is something wrong with people saying that they're a problem for a sane world, that they don't deserve rights, that they're all predators, all these things which are either based in kind of just hatred or outright lies and discrimination. I can see why they might think those are, guilty devils. But to say that woke trans people consider TERFs guilty devils rather than, opposition or some less loaded term like this is clearly a rhetorical move. It's meant to make the outgroup to the people who made this chart look like they're doing something inherently irrational and even maybe discriminatory by not liking people who advocate against their existence. Other guilty devils apparently are opponents of allowing trans women athletes to compete with biological women athletes. Is criticism of anti-trans athlete types always really so unreasonable that it needs to be compared to supernaturalist paranoia about literal devils? The Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, actually filed a lawsuit against the NCAA back in December for allowing trans women in college sports. And he just added to that suit, demanding that the NCAA require sex screening for all student athletes. It's worth knowing, though, that while people like Paxton say trans women will destroy women's sports, the NCAA has noted that among its over 500,000 athletes, 10 are trans. What kind of risk do they pose? The NCAA is supposed to take on a massive expense just to keep out a handful of people that the NCAA hasn't even said are causing problems in the first place? Who is really demonizing people unnecessarily here? Over a dozen sources have reported on this, and the coverage is, as you'd imagine, pretty varied, with only 14% of sources coming from the right, making this a potential blind spot for that side. While left-leaning sources tend to focus on Paxton's effort to sue the NCAA, right-leaning sources emphasize his claim that the NCAA is circumventing Trump's executive order on protecting women's sports. I discovered this story on Ground News, an independent app and website I've partnered with and trusted for years now to help me get a balanced view of the stories that I'm researching. Their platform organizes every published perspective on an issue in one place with data on each outlet's political bias, credibility, and financial incentives. You can get 40% off the same Vantage plan I use every day by going to ground.news/skeptic, or you can download the mobile app and use offer code SKEPTIC to save that 40% off unlimited access to their Vantage plan. You'll also get access to one of their most important features right now, their blind spot feed. It's dedicated to surfacing the most important stories that are being completely ignored by one side of the political spectrum or another, like this one. The political and media landscape is pretty chaotic and polarized right now, so I've been regularly checking the blind spot feed on my phone or straight to my inbox to make sure I understand what's really going on. So if you'd like to read the news skeptically, go to ground.news/skeptic or scan the QR code on your screen to get the same Vantage plan I use every day for just $5 a month. Now is the perfect time to take back control of how you stay informed and find new sources of information while you're at it. All right, back to the graph. What are the religious myths of the woke climate change religion? Climate change is the main cause of high-intensity forest fires. I do hear people talking about forest fires in the context of climate change. However, I've never heard a serious scholar or anything actually say that that's the main cause of high-intensity forest fires, period. We know that forest fires just happen. I mean, they're just an ecological reality. What I'm hearing people say is that climate change can intensify these things that already happen. You know, like climate change doesn't cause tornadoes, doesn't cause earthquakes, doesn't cause these things in their entirety. You know, they just exacerbate natural disasters that already happen on a regular basis. This is really interesting to have listed under the trans category. Trans women or trans men are identical to biological women or biological men. I hear people say a trans man is just as much of a man as a cis man. Yeah. But is that to say, oh, you're identical in every way? No, I've never heard anyone say that, actually. I read scientific articles about gender-affirming care and also just like psychological literature about, you know, gender identity, expression, that kind of stuff. Like, read that pretty regularly, and it very often talks about these differences. And trans people and their allies like me often cite this literature as being like in support of the existence of trans people and the legitimacy of, you know, using gender affirming care in order to seek a better life for yourself and, you know, better mental health and physical health outcomes. No, I just don't think it's true that people are out here saying in every way trans people are identical to cis people. There are differences, and people are okay with that. So I'd say this one is a bit of a straw man. Actually, kind of a lot of a straw man. I might even say that the idea that trans people and their allies believe this is itself a bit of a myth of the anti-woke types, I suppose. At least the people that made this graph. Sacred victims. Subsistence farmers, Maldives, young people, Bangladeshis, Global South. I've heard these people called those who will suffer the most because of changes that happen because of climate change. But are they sacred victims? To assert that climate change believing woke people are treating these as sacred victims takes a claim that's relatively mundane. These people will probably be hurt more by climate change than others, and elevates it to a level that I think we're supposed to read as unreasonable. You know, that's not a well-informed, evidence-based belief. That idea is based on superstition, irrationality, and emotion, and whatever else. Can you even state that young people will be affected by climate change more than boomers and not be a religious cultist to Boghossian and Schellenberger here? The sacred victims in the trans category are trans people and non-binary people. What I would say is that trans people and non-binary people are disproportionately affected in conversations about human rights right now. The Trump administration is very rapidly stripping trans people and non-binary people and intersex people as well of their right to identify as they do, be treated in a non-discriminatory way, to really exist in our society in any kind of public way. So if I say it's worth protecting the basic human rights of any group of person, trans people and non-binary people specifically in this case, is that automatically creating a religious dogmatic level category of sacred victims? Is there any way that I can say a group of people is being marginalized without Boghossian and Schellenberger saying that I'm a cultist? The elect, climate scientists, activists, journalists. Again, I'm wondering here, are we allowed to say that people have more expertise, that their voices carry a little more weight in a certain issue without being called cultists for thinking that? A rational evidence-based belief. I think that some people are going to object and say, oh, well, no, really what they're talking about is the degree of believing this. But from what I'm seeing on this, it doesn't seem to be talking about the degree to which people believe this. It's that people believe this. You believe that the elite, those who are chosen in some supernaturalist, religiously dogmatic way to make things right, are climate scientists, activists, journalists. It looks to me like they're saying if you believe that climate scientists are trying to make this right and maybe listening to them is the best idea here, that you're a part of a religious cult. I hope you're seeing what I'm saying. Classifying these things as features of religion seems to be a way to make a position that might be based in reason sound like it's based in something else, which is lesser. Speaking of that, supernatural beliefs. Climate change will make humans extinct. I hear people use, the word extinction rebellion, that kind of thing. But I'm not sure that the position for the vast majority of people, I've never heard anybody say that climate change will just make humans extinct, period. I actually haven't heard anybody say that. Maybe I'm naive, I don't know. I do hear humans are causing a sixth mass extinction, which it depends on how you define extinction, obviously. It depends on how you define words in this graph quite a bit, whether or not these statements are reasonable. But are we causing a mass extinction? By some measures, yeah. I mean, have you seen the statistics on how much plant and especially animal life has decreased in diversity and in just the sheer number of animals that exist on the earth now versus maybe just in the early 20th century? It's pretty staggering. And I think there's a good argument for calling that an extinction. I think there's a good argument for saying that a mass extinction has already happened at the hands of humans. Again, of course, that depends on how you're defining the word extinction. So is that a supernatural belief? I would say it's more of a statement that the authors would disagree with based on their interpretation of what that statement means. Putting it on a list like this, rhetorical move in their favor, right? Under the trans category, puberty blockers and surgery can change your biological sex. I think this has a lot to do with how you philosophically decide to define biological sex. Are we talking about genotype, phenotype? Are we talking about certain biological features like chromosomes and gametes to the exclusion of any secondary sex characteristics? What do we mean when we're saying biological sex? Because it's not exactly a simple matter to just give it one specific definition. It's a philosophical discussion and argument to define it in any given way. I think Katie Montgomery is really good on this. I would recommend that you guys check out her content. She does a really good job of talking about this issue specifically. We'll see if I can hold a candle to the way that she explains it. First of all, puberty blockers and hormone therapies are not exactly the same thing. But let's just examine the question, can hormone therapies, surgery, medical transition change a person's biological sex? Your phenotype can obviously change with medical intervention. Your secondary sex characteristics can look very, very different after both surgery and I think especially hormone therapy. Some other biological indicators also change. Your bone structure can change to a certain degree, and obviously your hormone levels can be quite different. Do these things change your genotype though? Like, do they change your DNA? No, they don't. But again, whether or not that is the one and only thing that you're willing to say has anything to do with sex comes down to a philosophical discussion argument for a specific definition of sex. So I think there's a good argument for saying that, hormone therapies, that surgeries can change biological sex. They can. Do they change it to be identical to someone who is genotypically a certain gender and hasn't undergone those interventions? No, it doesn't. But I don't think that this graph allows a lot of nuance here. It's just a sentence. Now look at this one. A person can immediately change their sex simply by identifying as the opposite sex or as non-binary. That's a supposed supernatural belief that we have, huh? I've never heard anyone say that. For real, I hang out with trans people all the time. I watch trans content, on YouTube all the time. I research stuff about gender affirming care pretty regularly. And I just haven't heard somebody say, oh yeah, well, I, realized that I was actually a man and poof, my biological sex suddenly changed. What? That's not the language that anyone is using. That's not the idea here. This is a straw man. I think that the people who made this graph see sex and gender as being one and the same thing. So when they see someone say, this person's gender expression and gender identity change, something like that, or something close to that. They think that someone is stating, my sex has suddenly changed in an instant. No. I think to have this idea and list it like so confidently as a supernatural belief of people who like believe in and support trans people and just, gender diverse people in general really reflects the fact that these guys, I don't think, are really plugged in with like their outgroup on this issue at all. Okay, we got to get through the rest of this thing. Taboo facts, things forbidden to say. Deaths from natural disasters have declined 90% since 1900. Never heard anybody thinking that that's a taboo thing to say. I mean, clearly that would have to do with the level of technology that we have to shield ourselves from the elements. I don't really know how bringing that up would be taboo. I think it's fine. Nuclear energy is safe, clean, and effective with myriad beneficial side effects. It's weird that that's listed as a taboo. I mean, I've watched videos on PBS produced, like woke liberal or woke leftist, whatever, PBS produced channels that talk about the pros and cons of nuclear and how nuclear can get a bad rap, which can be undeserved at times. I'm not sure that that's actually as taboo as this is saying it is. I often see climate change discussions be quite practical. There can be people that get quite polarized on things and not always speak at a practical level, but to say that that's a symptom of them being in a religious cult is, again, what is this? Say it with me. A rhetorical move. Taboo facts for trans stuff. Social acceptance of trans people is increasing. Doesn't hurt my feelings. I've never heard anybody say, oh, don't say that. In fact, I actually see people like Aaron Reed sometimes celebrate this. It's always placed within its context of where is acceptance of trans people increasing. Oh, here. Hooray, it is. That's awesome. We're happy to celebrate that. I'm not sure that the people who made this are very plugged in with the people that they're saying are in a religious cult. Trans kids and kids with gender dysphoria often benefit from parental involvement. I actually had an influential clinician named Iggy Moon on my channel to talk about gender affirming care in the UK and just gender affirming care in general. And they, proudly talked about how they explore gender in their clinic and they have the parents in the room and the parents are involved and it's great. And what I didn't see under that video in the comment section was the parents shouldn't be involved in that. The supportive parents, the parents who want the best for their kids and aren't just acting out of prejudice, they shouldn't be involved in their kids' lives or in their transition at all. No, I very often see parents who are involved in letting their kids make choices or helping steward their kids' choices in their best interest while not rejecting science surrounding gender issues or just forcing their kid down a path because of their own bigotries. I see those people praised. Those parents get praised all the time in the spaces that I run in. So the idea that it's always taboo to say that parental involvement can be beneficial to kids who are transitioning. I mean, what? Many detransitioners say they wish there had been more obstacles to changing their sex. Actually, there are statistics on this that you could consult. Detransition happens at a very low rate. It's somewhere around 1%, depending on exactly how you define detransition. And consistently across studies, what I've seen is that the majority of detransitioners actually say that they were happy they got the opportunity to transition. They're happy that they did transition. It just turned out to either not be for them, or more likely, they were forced out of transition because of some kind of stigma. Sometimes people get fired from their jobs and they detransition. And that, as far as I can tell, happens actually more often than people detransitioning because they felt like this was some horrible mistake and they wish that there were more obstacles to anyone being able to transition. So, do detransitioners say that they wish there were more obstacles to changing their sex? Yeah, there are. I'm sure you've seen a lot of videos on YouTube of detransitioners saying they wish there were more obstacles. It's often the same 4, 5, 6 detransitioners saying that on every single anti-woke or right-wing podcast, sometimes speaking at big political rallies. But if you actually look at the statistics, there are more people who say that, no, I detransitioned, but transitioning was actually a good thing. I'm glad that I was able to have the opportunity to do it. You might say it's a taboo fact to actually look at the statistics surrounding detransition for these people who made the graph here. Taboo speech, words that trigger anger among the elect. Detransitioners. Actually, I think you should check out the podcast that Matt Bernstein did with someone who transitioned and then transitioned back to their gender assigned at birth. And you should check that out. It got actually a very good reception from what I can tell. And the fact that people detransition was not treated as taboo. I think what might be taboo is bringing up detransitioners in order to make a point against the existence of trans people or gender affirming care, when statistics show that stuff I talked about earlier is true. The existence of detransitioners only in a person who's watched too many podcasts with Chloe Cole's mind actually undermines the idea that people are trans and that gender affirming care helps. Purifying rituals. Walking, biking, public transit. I mostly walk and skate places rather than driving. And I can't say that that's an act that makes me feel innocent of guilt and responsibility or is meant to do that. I mean, I do think that it is a more environmentally friendly choice or mode of transportation, sure. But can I not make that choice based on reason rather than because I have some kind of like emotional issue that's wrapped up in my religious ideology? According to Peter Boghossian and Michael Schellenberger, apparently not. Recycling. This is a funny one to list because there's actually a Climate Town video that's pretty big, has a lot of views that I've seen. And it basically says that recycling is 90% a total scam. There's some use in doing it, but it is not anywhere as effective as you would want. And recycling programs can be used as a way for certain politicians who don't really want to do environmental stuff to say, hey, you know, we really care about the environment. Look how much we're doing. We have a robust recycling program. But it's not actually all that efficient of a process. It's just funny to see this called like a purifying ritual of the woke climate religion when this is specifically criticized by other people that really often get called woke for their ideas about climate change. Purifying rituals for trans stuff. Announcing one's pronouns. I run in a lot of queer spaces, queer-friendly spaces, and I guess I'm a radical trans activist YouTuber or whatever, and I'm not really in the habit of like saying, "Hi, my name is Drew. My pronouns are he/him." Like, I don't really do that, and no one's ever given me any kind of problem for it. Like, when people have asked me my pronouns, I give them to them, and that's fine. But it's never been a thing I do to absolve myself of guilt or to signal to other people that, oh, I am a very good person. People have to determine whether or not like I'm a good person to be in that space based on the substance of what I say and my actions. It's not a purifying ritual. It's not something that's required. Sometimes people do put their pronouns on stuff, like on name tags in certain events or whatever. People put their pronouns on stuff. On social media, people put their pronouns on stuff. And once again, this list is saying that there can be no practical or rational reason to do this, like making other people feel comfortable or just expediting communication. There can be no real function of this. It is just a feature, a ritual in a dogmatic religious system. Same goes with educating people about trans stuff. I educate people about trans stuff because trans people are at risk or already are having rights taken away, and I think that's bad. There's a lot of misinformation about trans stuff. I don't like misinformation. My whole career has been about fighting misinformation. So, yeah, I do that. Can there not be a practical reason, a rational reason why people would do any of this stuff? This taxonomy says no, you're just in a cult. Purifying speech, words people use to be perceived as virtuous. Cis. No, it's not because it's a useful term to use. It can never be just like a useful piece of vocabulary to distinguish between cis and trans people, which the makers of the graph, by the way, think are different. They want to draw a distinction between cis and trans people, but they think that using the word cis is only purifying speech without substance? I mean, what is going on? Speech is violence. I've heard this kind of idea communicated And it's usually about things like, like stochastic terrorism, in reference to people like Matt Walsh and Libs of TikTok being directly linked to bomb threats and assaults and murders of trans people. So when certain things are linked, when certain people's speech is directly linked to actual acts of violence, maybe there's an argument to be made about speech being a form of violence or enabling violence, Maybe there's a practical reason for this. Would people say this? But no one could ever think this or have an argument for saying something like this. It's only something people say to virtue signal to other people in their cult. Trans women are women. I think this is a really interesting one because I've been advocating for trans people on my channel for like a few years now. I've made a lot of dedicated content to that. And I don't think I've ever said that on my channel. As an educator and communicator, I like to speak in a way that unpacks the meanings of a lot of the things that I'm saying. And, trans women are women. Well, I think that trans women are women and trans men are men and, so on and so forth. Just saying that in the context of a video which is essentially arguing for something like that kind of puts the cart before the horse. It gives away my conclusion rather than leading you there with evidence, with argument, that kind of thing. So I don't think I've ever said trans women are women on my channel until right now. Odd to see that listed as purifying speech, that apparently I have to speak in order to absolve myself of guilt or whatever in my cult. I don't know, man. This whole thing is about rhetoric, about painting people that you disagree with in a certain light. You know what? Let's unpack this further. Calling the woke or wokeness a religion, a weird, superstitious way of thinking, clearly means to denigrate the ideas involved. And this rhetorical move has been around for a long time. All the way back in the book of Acts in the New Testament, we find a story about a teacher from Samaria who's portrayed as an all-around bad dude, an enemy of the early apostles, a self-aggrandizing opportunist. He's accused of attempting to bribe the apostles to receive the power of the Holy Spirit, even. To this day, he's known in Christian tradition as Simon Magus, or Simon the Sorcerer, the father of all heresy, particularly that which is called Gnostic. The reality of the matter, though, Simon appears to have been a kind of Christian theologian that just differed in his cosmology and soteriology from other followers of Christ. And for this, he was branded as a sorcerer rather than an apostle or religious teacher.
That Simon of Samaria was associated with sorcery also may have just been because the rituals that he and his followers developed to achieve that salvation and thus were demoted to mere sorcery by his detractors. Recall that magic is just what they do, while what we do is always religion. That is always associated. Sorcery is a kind of rhetorical device, not a historical or theological descriptor of much value. One folks' theurgy is another folks' superstition and sorcery. Thus, when we remember him specifically as Simon Magus, that allows his enemies to forever speak through us, defaming perhaps the earliest Christian theologian, mystic, and ritual innovator.
I mean, really, what's the actual difference between religious ritual and sorcery? It's literally just a linguistic and rhetorical distinction. When the Enlightenment came around, a new version of this rhetorical tactic emerged. What I do is philosophy or science, while what you do is religion. Philosophy often deals in ideas equally abstract, speculative, unfalsifiable, and dogmatic to those found in religion. And post-Enlightenment medical science was regularly as superstitious and, goofy as any religious belief. Think humorism or bloodletting. The intellectual stigma surrounding the label of religion is pervasive enough that the fundamentalist evangelical Christian community I grew up in very regularly denied that it was religious. Christianity is not a religion, we said, but a relationship. Except when the IRS asks, because then we're definitely a religion. Also, all these guys, the conservative media tycoons, are all very religious, and even they like to use religion as a stigmatizing label for ideas they don't like. For hundreds of years now, distinguishing between one's own philosophy or science and another's religion has served the same purpose that distinguishing between religion and sorcery served for the Christian church. It puts a stigmatizing label on a person or idea in order to conclude that it's bad or dumb or irrational. Of course, this is more of a rhetorical trick than an argument, but if we were to formulate this as an argument, I think it might look something like this. Religion is bad and irrational. This thing is religion. Therefore, this thing is bad and irrational. Now, with their taxonomy of woke religion, Boghossian and Schellenberger, in effect, make this argument. The first premise, though, religion is bad or irrational, they don't support here. Although Boghossian has written elsewhere that religion should be considered a mental illness and treated as a public health crisis. Ironic for a self-described liberal free speech absolutist to essentially argue for an American version of the Soviet Union's League of the Militant Godless, which would use public institutions to cure infected children in schools of their faith virus. So yeah, Boghossian's audience just already thinks like anything that is religion is automatically like dumb and bad, I think. The second premise, this thing, wokeness, is a religion, is what this taxonomy seeks to support. But does it accomplish this? Religion is an extremely difficult thing to define. Scholars have proposed tons of different definitions over the last couple of centuries, and no one definition is agreed upon. Favoring one definition over another is more informed by one's own cultural and otherwise personal biases than by some objective process. We definitely see that in this taxonomy. Peter Boghossian has written about religion a lot, but does not substantially contend with actual scholarship on religious psychology, anthropology, or sociology, and instead treats it as little more than a set of beliefs based on bad epistemology or mental illness. This taxonomy contains a model of religion, then, which is based on an anti-theist view of Protestant Christianity. Protestant Christianity being the religion that Peter Boghossian sees around him the most, and I think is most influential on his idea of what religion is. Plenty of religions would not even graph onto this well. I mean, what is the original sin of Buddhism, or any religion that isn't Abrahamic? What are these supernatural beliefs of atheistic neo-paganism, or some forms of Judaism and Christianity, for that matter? Why are myths on this list always false narratives believed to be literally true in the style of fundamentalist Christianity, and never stories of moral worth rather than historical accounts in the style of countless other religions? Further, this taxonomy deals almost exclusively with one dimension of religiosity, the division of the sacred and the profane. This is an important dimension of religion, to be sure. It's straight out of Durkheim, the founder of modern sociology, but it's extremely light on ritual practice and says really nothing of any experiential dimension. Ironically, this whole project of attempting to denigrate wokeness by demonstrating that it is a religion rather than a philosophical system is a form of separating the sacred from the profane and defining an in-group and out-group. Boghossian and Schellenberger's anti-woke ideology, then, does what it accuses the woke's religious dogma of doing. In fact, I think I can even map their anti-woke thinking onto this graph. Anti-woke religion, a taxonomy. Original sin, emotionalism, narcissism, mental disorders, deviation from white cishet Christian cultural norms. In case you're not aware, there's a lot of talk in the anti-woke world about everything that is woke stemming from mental disorders, and that even people who are woke are genetically inferior. Yeah, it's a thing that people actually take seriously for real. Not everyone, I think. If you're anti-woke and still watching, I appreciate it, and I really hope that you don't think that everybody who disagrees with you is genetically inferior or mentally ill. Yikes. Guilty devils, the woke, SJWs, DEI instructors, trans people, leftists. Myths, Wokeness was created to destroy Western civilization and motivated by the mental instability and malice of queer people, racial minorities, and hysterical women. Marxism and postmodernism were devised by satanic cults. That might seem weird, but James Lindsay, who's like a close friend of Peter Boghossian and common collaborator, like that's his whole... He's like an atheist. That's his whole thing now. That Marxism and postmodernism were devised by satanic cults. You can go read or learn all about it from Jordan Peterson too. Like it's awesome stuff. The US was created to be and is meritocratic. The gender norms of mid-20th century white cishet Protestant Christians are biologically ingrained and have always existed. Sacred victims, white people, straight people, conservatives, Christians, men, women, although those who report fear of trans people, children, that being those who have been told that being LGBTQ is valid, and people who have been canceled. The elect, anti-woke podcasters, professors at University of Austin, where Michael Schellenberger teaches, Trump, Elon Musk, those who succeed under capitalism. If they've made it this far, then they must just be more virtuous or smarter than other people. It can't have anything to do with anything else. Supernatural beliefs. Gender identity is biologically determined and fixed from infancy. Euphemistically put, a gendered soul. Yes, I think the gendered soul accusation is projection. You can fight me about it. Legal protections against discrimination make systemic injustice impossible. Race science is rigorous and unbiased. The best ideas nearly always rise to the top in a free marketplace of ideas. Disagreement with the anti-woke is driven by mental illness and inferiority. Taboo facts. Social systems are largely constructed. Non-binary gender categories have existed in multiple cultures since we began recording history. There is drastically more power and wealth among the political right in the US and Europe than the left. Anti-woke media is more often funded by corporations or authoritarian governments to advocate for their interests than left-leaning media. Men report greater happiness in countries where women's rights are legally recognized and protected. Taboo speech. Cisgender. Heteronormativity, queer but not as a slur, diversity, equity, inclusion, BIPOC, social justice, toxic masculinity, redistribution of wealth, feminism, basically all the words that the woke like to use. Purifying rituals, mocking people for being too sensitive or emotional, reframing and explaining potential neurodivergence or mental health problems as something else. The amount of times I've heard some folks say like, no, I don't have anxiety, I don't have OCD, I really believe in the value of hard work, and that's why it like drives me insane to see something even slightly and arbitrarily out of place. Or something I came across when I was in college with a bunch of conservative Christian kids. No, like I don't have ADHD. I just have a spiritual problem with listening. Or, oh my God, I'm vitriolically angry and screaming at a waiter because it's his fault, not because I'm slightly uncomfortable in the chair that I'm sitting in and have like sensory issues and I'm taking it out on somebody else. Conforming to white heteronormative expectations in body posture, dress, and voice. Purifying speech. I don't care if you're offended. Wokeness is a cult. The Bible says, I'm correct, not politically correct. Is that one old? Is that like a millennial thing of me to say that people say? I'm a free speech absolutist. Protect women from queer people. Protect children from queer people. Patriot, as in I'm a patriot. And freedom. I think we all like freedom, but I think there's one side of the political spectrum that's very like, I care so much about freedom, unlike you people who like apparently, whatever. Okay, no, let's be real here. With a little creativity, any and all human communities can be grafted onto this thing. We all have norms, taboos, stories, ideas about what's good and bad, etc. If the anti-woke ideology that created this taxonomy to disparage its outgroup can itself be mapped onto this structure, does that mean that anti-woke ideology is also bad and dumb and religious? Maybe. If you see this taxonomic structure of religion as valid and you think religion is bad and dumb, then yes. Alternatively, though, and this is what I lean toward, we could say that this just isn't a useful model of religion. It was, after all, built to serve specific goals in the creator's partisan politics, and not to meaningfully describe what religion is, or what is religion. All right, this was a fun one, and I'm sure everyone will be pleased with it. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. You can also check out the religious studies courses I produce with Dr. Joseph Laycock. They should be linked below the video. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, even if that's considered woke or anti-woke or whatever. And until next time, stay skeptical.